Serial compression. Have you ever tried to get, 6 or 10 dB of gain reduction on a compressor, and you find that the compression is way too audible, it's pumping, or it just doesn't sound natural? But sometimes you just have to compress something hard. If you want to control a track, tame the transients, and just get it to sit solid in the mix without audible compression, serial compression is the key. What we're talking about here is using 2 or more compressors, one after the other, to just gently tame the transients. And it's like my sanding analogy from an earlier video. You just take one layer off at a time until you have a nice smooth surface. Engineers use this all the time on vocals. It's not limited to just that. Let's jump into a song. This is Sam O'Hare. The album comes out on streaming September 24th, but if you want to get it ahead of time, the CD is available now. But this song's been out for a little while, so I can show you what I did here. Let's hear this vocal without compression.
There's silence deep in the woods, back where I once stood. The forts are still standing when the trees are branding, a sign of our childhood. Home to live, my mind clear, all is calm at home. The world takes its time here, feels so good being home, feels so good being home.
So there are just a few lines that jump out. The volume really ramps up, and we want to even that out a bit. But overall, it's a very nice organic kind of take, and I don't want to ruin that with tons and tons of heavy-handed compression that you can hear as compression. So to do that on this track, I'm going to use 2 compressors. Typically, the approach here is going to be to start with a fast compressor and then follow that up with something slower. So we'll start with, what better fast compressor than something like an 1176. I like to use a high ratio for this, something like 8 or 12 to 1. And we want a fast attack and release. Of course, everything on an 1176 is fast. It only gets faster. Even at its slowest setting, this is a fast compressor. So let's stick with these kind of conservative settings.
There's silence deep in the woods, back where I once stood. The forts are still standing when the trees are branding, a sign of our child.
So for this compressor, I just want to dial it in to grab the very highest peaks and get out of the way. So most of the time it's not going to be doing anything. It's not going to be compressing at all. But when Sam jumps up to like...
The forts are still standing when the trees are branding, a sign of our child.
It's just going to get in and get out and make sure that those real loud notes get pushed down just a little bit. I'm still not really hearing compression.
The forts are still standing when the trees are branding, a sign of our childhood.
And I also want to make sure to level match so that when I bypass the compressor, I'm hearing about the same volume coming out as I was with the compressor engaged. Again, on this line, we're probably not going to see any gain reduction.
Back where I once stood.
Perfect. So we're going to follow that up with something a little slower, a little more syrupy. And the classic choice for that would be an LA2A. I'm going to use the Brainworks BX Opto. It's kind of the same idea. This one's going to do probably the bulk of our compressing.
Back where I once stood. The forts are still standing when the trees are branding, a sign of our childhood. There's silence deep in the woods, back where I once stood. The forts are still standing when the trees are branding, a sign of our childhood. Home to live, my mind clear, all is calm at home. The world takes its time here, feels so good being home,
So with our opto compressor, I'm not really looking for a specific amount of gain reduction, but I want that needle to not quite reach zero in between. I mean, obviously, if there's a long pause in the vocal, it's going to reach zero. But in general, continuous lines, I don't quite want that needle to touch zero. The way that this kind of optical compressor releases is actually in two stages. So it's going to grab the loudest peaks. It's going to release pretty quickly, and then it's actually going to take its time up to a couple of seconds to get all the way back to zero. We really don't have to push it too hard. It's just going to be a nice smooth, I think of the vocal floating on the compression or floating on that gain reduction needle. So let's take a look at what both of these compressors are doing at the same time. Keep in mind our MC77 is first in the chain, and then it's hitting the BX Opto.
There's silence deep in the woods, back where I once stood. The forts are still standing when a tree is our branding, a sign of our childhood. Home to let my mind clear, all is calm at home. The world takes its time here, feels so good being home. It feels so good being home.
So you can see when he hits that high home, the two compressors together are compressing a total of probably 10 or so decibels, but you're not hearing it squeeze down. The reason it's less noticeable compression is, if you think about it, each compressor has a chance to recover to a neutral state of not compressing before the next transient. So it's just like you're sanding away with the first compressor the largest peaks, and then your largest peaks are up here. And then you sand second compressor, your largest peaks just a little bit lower, but each individual process isn't entirely audible on its own. It's audible, but it's not distracting. It's not pumping. It's not super noticeable, if you know what I mean. Now, what if we wanted to flip this on its head? Right now, we're not getting a lot of the character of the faster compressor, that 1176 style compressor, because it's not acting a whole lot. It's only grabbing the very tippy top peaks of the vocal. So sometimes what I like to do is experiment with switching up the order. What if we have this nice dual stage release optical compressor? So let's bypass the faster compressor, take the opto, we'll start from scratch.
There's silence.
And this is a perfectly good vocal compressor on its own. A lot of times people will use this for tracking.
There's silence deep in the woods, back where I once stood. The forts are still standing when a tree is our branding, a sign of our childhood. Home to let my mind clear, all is calm at home. The world takes its time here, feels so good being home. It feels so good being home. There's silence deep in the woods.
Still just kind of floating on that gain reduction. You're not going to hear it a lot because the release is so slow. You could squeeze a little bit more out of this compressor than you could something that was a lot more aggressive. We're not quite reaching zero at the ends of those lines. Let's leave that here. That's our first compressor. Pull up the purple. And let's reset that.
There's silence deep in the woods, back where I once stood. The forts are still standing when a a tree is our branding, a sign of our childhood. Home to let my mind clear. All is calm at home. World takes its time here. Feels so good being home. Feels so good being home.
Now you can see that because I've already leveled out the vocal a little bit with this optical compressor and it's just sort of floating on there, I'm able to push a little bit more gain reduction with the 1176 style compressor. It's able to act more often because the vocal's already sitting at a nice spot. Play with this. Try it both ways. Don't be afraid to experiment with reordering your signal chain because you may find something wild and unconventional that really works. Let's hear this compared to no compression. We'll jump to the chorus. Uncompressed.
Home to let my mind clear.
Compressed.
All is calm at home. World takes its time here. Feels so good being home. Feels so good being home.
So you can see we're taking a significant amount of level out of that vocal, but it doesn't sound squashed as it would if you just slammed one compressor on it and tried to squeeze 10 or 12 dB of compression out of it. The idea here is just to give a little lift to the quieter syllables by pushing down the loud ones. This is a very dynamic vocal performance. There's the falsetto really has a different quality to it than the chest voice, so I ended up doing a serious amount of automation, and usually that's the best solution for getting it to really sit on top of a mix just right. The compression is going to help smooth it out a bit and make it easier for you to ride the fader, and of course it's going to add some character and help you shape the dynamics of the track.